Ahead of the Remco Evenepoel consolation race tomorrow, we have the recap of the Vuelta a España with Benji. I look like I've been dragged backwards through a bush, and maybe I have been, I don't know. We'll go through all the stages, our winners and disappointments, what we expect from some of the revelations like Gino Maida. Welcome back, Benji, from your no days of rest. Straight podding the whole time. Stage 1, the TT or prologue that wasn't called a prologue. Roglič, then Philipsen, first sprint stage, and Lanterne on the first mountaintop finish. Very unusual for the GC group not to win that. He wins, takes the jersey for 2 days. Jakobsen, the next sprint stage. Tarame keeps the jersey despite crashing. Philipsen wins the third sprint stage in the first 5 stages. Kenny Elissonde takes the jersey off Tarame because Tarame crashes the second time. Magnus Cort wins on Cullera ahead of Roglič, but Roglič takes red. Then Stora, the first breakaway stage on stage 7. That's the stage where Großschartner and Haig took time on Balcon d'Alicante. Then Jakobsen goes 2 and 2 against Philipsen on stage 8. Then Caruso, the 70-kilometer break on stage 9. Roglič goes into the first rest day in the leader's jersey. I'll pause on the first rest day, Benji. What do you think of the first week? I think one too many sprint stages for me.
I think so as well. It's starting off quite mountainous, for a Vuelta every single time. We've got a bit of a mountain in the first few days, and we've got that on stage 3, which was fun, but I do feel like it was not necessarily lackluster, but it wasn't a very explosive stage. The Picon Blanco climb was not climbed at the ultimate tension, despite us having a few riders that already dropped off the back, the likes of a Carapaz. And that was one of the main events of the first few days, the fact that Carapaz was not at the top. Haig indeed looking not that perfect at the start either. So a few indications that certain riders weren't going to do well, and some riders that perhaps would make it back to a decent level by the end of La Vuelta and be able to set up a decent result. But it was a start mainly of the rise of Intermarché with that Tarame victory, and I think we'll definitely talk about them when we venture into our wins here.
Well, exactly, because stage 10, another breakaway win for Michael Stora on Rincon de la Victoria. Old Christian Eiking takes the red jersey. You'll remember he and Guillaume Martin were marking each other. This is also the stage where Roglič went on that attack for no reason and crashed. Could have lost the Vuelta there before the next stage, the stage that was nailed on for him. They caught the break this time. Poor Magnus Cort up the road, and he won Roglič on Valdepeñas de Jaén. Then the next stage, 12 to Córdoba, was Magnus Cort. Was this from the larger reduced group, Benji, where Matthews was there and bike exchange at pace? And then the Ciccone Bardet attack? Yes, that's the one. Old Christian Eiking still in the leader's jersey, by the way, for like 7-8 stages. 13 was the Seneschal, if you don't look back, you are not a leader win, with Jakobsen losing his wheel. So I'm enjoying going through, remembering all these funny moments. Stage 14 was Bardet. This is the Jay Vine Undertaker gif, getting hit by the car, coming back from the dead, and Bardet still won on the mountaintop finish. Pico Viercas. Micah on stage 15, the 85k solo. Old Christian Eiking still in the red jersey. GC not changing at all, by the way, all this time in the second week. And then second rest day. So that second week, Benji, again, maybe I overrated a bit. I think maybe because I've enjoyed some of the subplots, but the headline action, GC action, really was lacking there, with Jumbo not particularly interested in taking back red.
Yeah, I think so as well. It's the typical second week, to be honest, where you've got the tension going down a bit because people are just expecting more action to come in the third week. And that is visible here as well. It's visible in every single Giro that we've had in the last few years, last year as well, this year as well. And in the Vuelta this year, it was very noticeable too. And that's because despite there being mountains at the end of the last week, it's a few days just before the Lagos Covadonga comes and Alto del Angliru comes. Comunitario, close enough.
So after the second rest day, we have another sprint stage. It's a little bit rollier though, but that was won by Jakobsen. And then it was the Covadonga stage 17. We got into the good stages. Roglič won that stage. This was the Bernal 60-kilometer raid with Roglič. I want to come back to this stage in a second, Benji. Roglič takes the leader's jersey. He'll never lose it. Stage 18 up to Gamoniteru. won by Lopez, the Queen stage. No one could go with him, but he can't take back enough time. Stage 19, Court wins from the very small group in the break with DS7 Bike Exchange chasing all day. Stage 20, my best Grand Tour stage of the year. Clément Champoussin wins, but absolute carnage behind, with Lopez abandoning after Bahrain mounted a coup. Then stage 21, the TT went exactly as we expected, Roglič winning and all staying. No GC changes except for Kuss losing a few spots in the top 10. Roglič taking out the Vuelta a España. Gino made of the young jersey. Fabio Jakobsen green. Stora KOM and Bahrain D teams classification. Do you know who won most aggressive? It was Court.
I don't know. I have no clue, actually. Probably a Spanish rider.
Probably Biscaro. Jesus Orada.
Amesqueta.
Maybe. Yetzibal maybe, because on Burgos.
We'll give our combativity. Well, who's yours? Probably Cord, right?
Magnus Court. Has to be.
Yeah. If it's not Cord, it's Store. So, but he's got a jersey already, so let's give it to Cord.
Yeah. Otherwise, I want to... Looking at the GC gaps, because there's something that's been mentioned in the comments, and we even mentioned it, but with Bernal's TT, well, first of all, I didn't expect Egan Bernal to do such a good TT and beat Adam Yates. I had Adam Yates ahead of Bernal on the TT. Now, maybe that's because Yates had to go out too hard too early. But people are saying, if Bernal had been in the split, he would have come third. And I'm like, that's not really how INEOS strategy on stage 20 worked. Their strategy was to counter until they got one of the two into a split that was, good for them, and then the other sits back. That's just, and one was happened to be Bernal, and Yates was strong at that moment. But going back to the stage with Roglič, Benji, now we're talking pure 2020 hindsight. Did Bernal lose his podium shot there, where he went on the 60-kilometer raid and invested too much in the valley and got caught?
You could see it as that, but I also see it as an attack that tried to get him on the podium. But yeah, it has his influence on his energy for the next couple of days, sure. But I still feel like on the last day, he would not have had the energy to follow the attacks of, mainly Yates there. So if Bernal would have made that attack, I don't think we'd have a situation where Lopez was off the back, for example. So there's a bit of a problem there where I don't think it would have necessarily had the split on stage 20 that we currently had. So that change would not have affected stage 20 in the way that perhaps we expect based on what we saw, if that makes any sense.
I think we see with INEOS here, we'll talk about them now, a disappointing Vuelta for them. Their expectations are higher than other teams. They have the highest budget in cycling, 4th and 6th on GC, no jerseys, no stage wins. I think what we're seeing here, Benji, is INEOS have actually accumulated a lot of GC contenders with Thomas and Port aging out, who actually aren't that good at time trial. And when you pair two attacking guys who aren't good at time trial, it's not always the best combination. For Haig and Mader, when they shot their long shot, that worked, but also Mader could pull the flat really hard, and he was also domestique for Haig, let's be real. Would it have been different, Benji, if you have Bernal as the aggressor and a Dumoulin, Pete Thomas style rider behind? I think that's the perfect combination. We saw it in 2019 Tour de France with Thomas and Bernal. It worked well. Do you think we'll see Yates and Bernal paired together in a Grand Tour next year?
Well, it's very possible that they are still paired together in a Grand Tour, but I see the main issue not necessarily being that, one of the main issues is that they can't time trial as good as a Roglič or a Pogačar, but the other problem is that they also can't climb as good as a Roglič and a Pogačar. So we can blame the time trial we want, but in the end, they're just not as good at the moment. And I haven't seen a Bernal on the level that Roglič is and that Pogačar is really at all. Like, we can talk about the Giro, but the level at the Giro, in my eyes, performance-wise, is lower than when we see a Roglič at peak and a Pogačar at peak. And it's going to be very difficult for INEOS to put either of their riders on that level unless it's with some major tactical move. But it's very hard to beat teams that are on paper just as good as you these days in Grand Tours. Because, let's be honest, INEOS' team has been good in the Giro and so forth. But in the Tour de France and the Vuelta, the team crumbled. And it's not only the leaders that aren't good enough to beat the leaders of other teams, it's also the team that isn't good enough to help those leaders help beat the competition. So I think their main issue just isn't that they don't have a Slovenian wonder kid at their top at the moment, and they need to find a GC leader that is capable of winning against Pogačar and Roglič, and that's very much not easy to figure out, because I think looking at this Vuelta, even if Roglič has half the team of the one he had right here, I still think that he would likely have won this race. And perhaps the crashes of the other teams do have a consequence in that, but hey, what do you think about that?
I think, the question marks about Roglič for me are still the same, in that good team, bad team, whatever, his level, as Benji said, is so much better than, say, Bernal, in my view. Like, you look at Bernal stage 6 when he was slapping it on the San Giacomo Hill mountaintop finish. Remco put up his power data. It's 5.6 watts per kilo for 36 minutes. It's not that high on a mountaintop finish like that, honestly. And that was still having a pretty big selection amongst the GC guys. Vuelta, if you weren't able to, I think Bernal did. A separate topic, but Roglič. The same question marks are here. This Vuelta changes nothing in terms of my perception of Roglič, what his problems, weaknesses, strengths are for the Tour de France next year. Like, you can say no risk, no glory all you want, catchphrase, love it. Yes, I'm boring. Yes, I'm probably a curmudgeon, but the stage 10 attack is not smart. It is not. That's the only way he loses this Vuelta, is doing something like that and crashing, and he falls a little bit the wrong way on that crash. He breaks his collarbone, Enric Mas or someone else wins this Vuelta España. When Roglič, and because we were saying at the time, it's like he's not 20 seconds ahead. He's 2.5 minutes ahead because of the TT. Like, you have to, just because the TT's at the end, like, you have to factor in his expected gain in the TT. That's why it makes it so risky. And if he does those sort of things against Pogačar, you can't make mistakes like that against Pogačar and survive. So, has your opinion of Roglič changed, Benji? Are you like, now he can win the Tour de France, or it's kind of all the same?
No, I still think that La Vuelta, for me, in comparison to the Giro and the Tour, you've got riders that go to the Vuelta that either rode the Giro or felt their goals in the Tour de France. It's a bit of a consolation prize for the people who did not win the Tour de France. Or if a madman who won the Tour de France goes to it, it's to get the double. But that hasn't happened in a while. So I expect that to happen in the coming years, where Pogačar tries that at least once. But for now, that hasn't happened. So when it comes to Roglič, he beat the riders that he should have beaten. He was favored before the race. And the only thing that could keep him from winning this race was either crashing, a gigantic puncture that brought him into a horrible position, or something like Formigal or Paris-Nice stage 8, stage 7, whatever amount of stages Paris-Nice has these days. Something chaotic that puts him out of GC contention, and that did not happen this Vuelta, so he was able to sustain that because he's the best climber and the best time trialist on the start line here, and it's as simple as that. And the best sprinter, according to his last interview.
So exactly. But speaking about Egan Bernal, Benji, here's a statement. This doesn't count as Egan Bernal against Roglič head-to-head at their peak, because Egan Bernal had an affected preparation. So you can't say that Roglič is better than Egan Bernal.
Well, I've never seen Egan Bernal ride climbs at the level that Roglič does at the peak. So if Roglič and Bernal are at the Grand Tour at their peak, then Roglič wins, unless something happens to Roglič, or something tactical makes Bernal able to win that race. But we've seen so far not that much tactical stuff coming from INEOS that could overtake the race, really. They tried on Covadonga, but what they did there was for the podium, not for the victory. So we haven't seen a situation where they made such a tactic go for the victory, unless Froome back in the day in that Giro 2018. That was big tactics.
It's different though. It's so hard for Bernal. Let's explain why it's different. It's so hard for Bernal to make that succeed, because Froome is 10 kilos heavier than Bernal. He's a good time trialist. He took time on the pedaling descents. I'm not sure, I can't remember if there was more valley. If Bernal drops Roglič, Bernal did, this is why I think the statement that Bernal wasn't at his peak, like, he did some of his best ever numbers when he had Roglič, I think, under a little bit of pressure on that the last climb where he attacked, 6.5 for like 20 minutes or something. If he goes solo, they get to the valley, it's for Jumbo-Visma and maybe Roglič relaying against Bernal in the valley. He's got no shot.
He's fucked.
Yeah, it would have been worse. So if it has sort of succeeded completely. So that's made it so hard for Bernal, and that's the limitations, I guess, of not being a huge guy.
That stage does have like huge consequences for the race, though, despite it not being for Bernal. Bernal basically, with that attack, closes off the GC lead battle because this Vuelta in its total, this brings me to a bit of a discussion when it comes to my favorite stage. Like you said earlier, stage 20 was your favorite stage of this Grand Tour and this year. I agree, but there's one thing lacking in that stage, and that's a battle for the first place in GC.
Exactly.
We have a battle for the podium. And the reason that we don't have a battle for the victory is because the Covadonga stage, where Bernal basically makes that move and Roglič gets not really a free ride, because he had to put a lot of energy in to get that, but he gets an assist to locking the GC victory for him. And that stage basically locked that victory for me and made the tensions of that a tiny bit lower on stage 20, but it's still the best stage of the season for me because we had tactical stuff, and everybody knows we like some tactical stuff on here.
So I think this, to round out the INEOS discussion, the way this Vuelta played out as well, I was so surprised they didn't go hard after Almeida, and they seem to be really missing the Dumoulin, Geraint Thomas style GC contender at the moment, with Thomas maybe re-signing, maybe not. I'm not sure. But the next man who maybe overperformed, Gino Mader. Can Gino Mader podium a Grand Tour in 2022, Benji? And which one would he be best for? I think probably the Giro.
I think 2022 might be difficult because of the team that he is in. He's in a team with Mikel Landa. You can say all you want about Mikel Landa this year. He crashed in the Giro when he was showing extremely good form, and he was worthless in basically everything past day 2 in La Vuelta. But he's still going to be one of the big names at Bahrain next season. So they're going to look at Landa before they look at Gino Mader for a GC lead in a Grand Tour. And I'm afraid that's going to cost Mader unless, again, Landa crashes out or has a bad week at the start. Sure, I do think that they're going to keep him in mind as a co-leader in those races, which would be excellent because that is the way that Caruso was able to podium the Giro. He was staying in the GC despite Landa still being there in the first few days. Sure, he couldn't have lost too much time in the first few days anyway, but I think that's a big influence in that. And we're talking about bad preparation for Bernal, but didn't Mader crash out of the Giro as well? Or am I misremembering that?
I can't remember. No, I think he was... No, he did. He DNF'd after, you're right, after stage 12 on Bagno di Romagna. Yeah, wow. And then he did Tour de Suisse. He mustn't have been bad because he did Tour de Suisse about 3 weeks afterwards.
True.
And he won that. Mike Woods let him out on the cobbles. That was a great stage.
Yes.
Anyway, I really rate Gino Mader. I think he's just so consistent in the third week. And you say, who was the most consistent domestique in the third week? It's, for me, clearly Gino Mader. Every time Haig was getting dropped on 17 and 18, Mader would bring him back. And that was invaluable. And it was kind of like the Sepp Kuss of 2019, 2020 breakout, it reminds me. Now, his TT, I think it can improve. It's not disastrous, but he probably hasn't done too much work on it. He's still young. Remember, he was on NTT last year and then probably looking around for a contract. Now got one at Bahrain. So, it's not like this guy's like, let me just go and spend money on a wind tunnel while he's looking to just get a World Tour contract last Christmas.
Yeah, but in hindsight, like, Gino Mader had talent last year. It's kind of surprising that he had to struggle that much to get that level of a contract. Same, true, O'Connor, you're right. But we're talking about Mader as a domestique. We're going back a bit to INEOS for 1 second here. Sivakov as a domestique, do you think that is GC hopes for the future are over and that he's going to fold into a GC role in the coming years based on the fact that this year GC was not the case for him at all?
Sivakov, I think, is the one bright spot from this Vuelta for INEOS. Actually, him and Pidcock probably didn't have the Vuelta he wanted or INEOS wanted of him, but he actually did some pretty good pulls to set things up particularly on stage 20. But Sivakov was very good, I thought. and a consistent domestique. He came third on the Balcon de Alicante stage when Stora was just too good. My view, Benji, is Sivakov doesn't have a good TT. I think his natural weight is above the weight he needs to be at to be doing 6.3 consistently for 20 on mountaintop finishes, 6.4, whatever, on the unipod, on the single mountaintop stages, they do crazy watts per kilo when it's been easy beforehand. I don't know. I just always remember his Cadel Evans Great Ocean Road race, which is obviously an outrageous thing to say, but he's off season. He's probably at his natural weight a bit bigger, and this guy was shredding it on the flat. On these rolly parkour, he was putting a lot of people into difficulty. And yeah, I just think unless he can grow 2 centimeters and improve the TT if he gets to 190, I don't know. What would you do with him? Because I still think he's so good and versatile. I just think he's almost putting I'm probably, it's a bit early, he's 24, saying he can never do GC, but I think 1 week GC he can be good at still.
Yeah, the weird thing about him is that we were watching, was it Tour de l'Ain last year or Dauphiné, where he was arguably better than Bernal on some of the climbing stages. I think mainly on the Dauphiné, but I can't remember completely. But one of those stages he was definitely doing great. Oh yeah, certainly. And just in general, the fact that this year his GC battles have been so much lower, despite the potential of that being so high, it's just a bit odd. And I hope that he can find what he personally wants to achieve, because I still believe that he's got GC goals, and at his age he can definitely still grow in that. But right now, Gino Mader has proven more than him, and I think he's a year younger, but I could be wrong in that. Or is he also 24 these days, Mader? He is also 24 these days. Okay. They're close together. But I kind of try to compare both of those because I feel like they've been around for the same amount of time in professional World Tour cycling these days. So, yeah, I don't know what to expect from Sivakov. I just feel like he's gone down in my vision when it comes to his future in GC, to be honest. But
well, that was the INEOS plan, right? It was Laurens de Plus, Sivakov would be taking over as regular podium contenders for GC for Grand Tours, or at least be super domestiques. Now, I think I am very pleased to see Sivakov's performance at the Vuelta. I think they should just, don't put any pressure on him to be a GC guy. See what he wants to do, see what actually works for him, where he's actually putting out the best power and comfortable and consistent. And just play it by. Still young, 24, but winners and disappointments for the Vuelta, Benji. Winners, obviously, EF, I think, with Court. Intermarché are the biggest winner relative to expectations, having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 days in the leader's jersey. Would have been 10 without Taramay crashing, and a stage win. So I think Intermarché are the biggest winners relative to expectations.
I think so as well. They are certainly the ones that achieved more than what everybody thought they could. And it started off with that Taramay victory, like we mentioned earlier, and it kept on going from that point onwards. Sure, we don't have Eiking winning that stage, but days in red for a team like that is important, and I think it's a potential step up. But I also don't know, based on their transfers, what their goals are as a team for next season, for example, because they have the Christoph coming in and so forth. So that is something that could add results. But when it comes to a GC rider in their team, do you see someone that could potentially go for a top 5 at GC? I currently don't really, to be honest.
No, a top 5 would be difficult because then TT comes into it. Yeah, I forgot they would have Menkes if he hadn't crashed out. I think they're, I don't know. I'd re-sign Menkes and just sort of go again and then go stage hunting again, to be honest, would be what I would try to do if I was them. Otherwise, Movistar, I think, had a really good Vuelta. Even with the Lopez thing, I think they had a good Vuelta. I wish, they only spoke about the positive stuff. Say, if I was them, I'd be like, not talking about the Lopez thing anymore. It's between us and him. Yeah. Let's talk about our Vuelta. We won the Queen stage, our only Grand Tour stage of the year. We had a guy on the podium second. He was best of the non-Rogliches. That's a really good result. We beat INEOS at the Vuelta. We had 2 guys up there all race with no teammates. Great performance from us. That's the narrative I do. I still think, Benji, it's a win for Movistar.
Certainly, and it's mainly a win because of that podium for Mas, but we cannot forget about the victory of Lopez either, despite the drama that happened afterwards. It's like, with this drama, it seems like people are forgetting what Lopez did for this team. He's literally the most winning rider on this team this entire year. He's got the most victories of all riders on their team. So he's quite important for the team to get results, it seems. And
Yeah, because
I'd
he'll
argue
actually
that,
attack.
yeah, exactly. And he's the kind of rider that might not always be on the second or third spot in GC. He was for a long time in this Vuelta, though. But that offers him opportunities when he's 12th or 5th or 6th in GC to go for an attack from a group where the elite riders are looking at each other a bit and take that victory at the end of the stage, because it's happened quite a few times in his life. And that's very valuable. And I'd argue that he just had a bit of bad luck and one unwise decision, and that led to his podium falling away. But that does not take away all the performances of the last 3 weeks that were good performances. Their tactics in week 1 and week 2, there were a few things where you're like, oh, Mas is chasing Lopez for like,
It's
no,
a second
Lopez was
here or
chasing
there.
Mas, but it's not that important if in the end you're second and third at the end of the stage, and that only has 2 or 3 seconds consequence. So I'd argue that their tactics in week 1 and 2 are great, and in week 3 were a tiny bit worse perhaps, but in the end I'd argue that it's just that one moment that fucked it for Lopez, and they should be very happy with what Mas did here, and they should try and focus on the positives that came out of this Vuelta, because they haven't won that much in Grand Tours this year. I think Lopez was their only Grand Tour stage.
Correct. They only have 3 World Tour victories, and the others were at Romandy and Valverde at the Dauphiné. So now on to disappointments, which we have to say, because there was not the spoils evenly shared around in this Vuelta of España. I think Bora Hansgrohe sent, you'd think Shark would have done well, but before his crash, he still wasn't looking good. Bora Hansgrohe, I honestly forgot they were here. Quebecer, it's hard to criticize them too much, but then you look at Nizzolo did the Giro and then didn't do the Tour of the Vuelta, and he's their best rider. It just seems to be a bad allocation of resources there. So that's my criticism. UAE, I think Trentin personally will be disappointed. They did work for him, but otherwise the team actually did quite well, I think, with Micah and Gibbons looking good, and then De La Cruz. Bike exchange and worked a lot on the wrong stages. We said it over and over again, wrong stages to work for Matthews. And then when it came to the right ones, they were quite tired. Trek Segafredo, again, Ciccone went for GC and then crashed out, didn't he? And then they didn't really feature in breaks except for Simmons. So,
you know who I find the biggest losers at this race?
FDJ.
And they were already the biggest losers going into this race. Israel Startup Nation when it comes to their team selection. They've done basically nothing this entire race, and it's because they were so odd in choosing not to send Martin and Woods to the Vuelta. And it basically fucked over their plans for the Vuelta to do anything.
Dan Martin had, I think, 58, 57 race days by the end of the Tour de France. Like, they sent him to a Giro d'Italia where, okay, he won the stage, but the man is better in hot weather, doesn't seem to like wet descents, which, again, not a criticism. It's actually a pretty normal thing to not like. And they don't send him to the Vuelta where he came – where did he come last year? Like 4th? He came 4th last year, won a stage with like multiple – like 7, 8 top 10s in stages. I think he would have done well at this Vuelta again with the sort of finishes we had. Valdepeñas to Jaén. If Enric Mas is there with Roglič, Dan Martin, I think, would have been there too. So I think – sending him and Woods, the problem is, okay, maybe send him to the Tour. Well, I don't know what he did at the Tour. He seemed to be out of form, and then he came good on Luz Ardennes, but then it's like didn't go on the break. They sent Woods there as well. They have to send, I think what Benji was getting at, they had to send one of Woods or Martin to this race to give them puncher. And there's punchy stages here as well. Imagine on Cullera, Benji, can you imagine Dan Martin or Mike Woods attacking out of the Roglič group and catching Cort? Because I can.
Yeah. I agree. And I don't get it when you see this parkour from so many months beforehand and you choose to send both Woods and Martin to the bloody
Tour
Tour.
of Britain.
Well, Tour of Britain as well. But sure, Dan Martin is retiring at the end of the season. That is a sad thing where he's getting out of cycling. But he could have ended this on a high note. But he decided to finish in the Tour of Britain, perhaps because it's closer to its home.
He's
I
doing
don't know.
Lombardia.
Okay, nah, then I don't fucking know what he's doing.
He's good at Lombardia, but yeah, if he doesn't
but
bit of
come on.
sense, then
He could have done shit at the Vuelta, and I don't know why he's not there, and I can't get over that because that is such a planning mistake for a rider in my eyes. It's the same as not sending Colbrelli to a Vuelta his entire career so far. While sure, he went for the Autumn Classics in Italy, but I would have preferred him see win a leader, a green jersey. Was it green already in the past? I think it was as well. I'm not sure. In the Vuelta as well.
So Ben Herman's also one of their best punchers, and he doesn't want to do Grand Tours. I would have said, Ben, just go until the first rest day at the Vuelta. You'd probably still pick up a stage, and go home then. He would have been good. So yeah, that was our biggest problem with Israel. What about FDJ though? They completely lost confidence in Demar. Guarnieri left. It's not looking good for them at the moment. With even the Demar train, the tension seems even worse now.
Yeah, and we had him last year basically cleaning up sprints in the Giro and performing really well in the likes of a Tour de Wallonia and so forth. Arguably the best Demar of his career was last year. Sure, it was not against the top competition, but it's still a very notable sprint difference compared to this year. And it's also a big difference when it comes to the train. It doesn't seem to work that well together. The oil of the machine of the train doesn't seem to work that perfectly this year. And it seems, is there a reason to that? Like, is there something that we notice in sprints that's different from last year that does not allow a train like the one of Groupama coming forth? I don't know. I can't think of something.
What train were they competing against in the Giro last year? Was there one? Like, who was he competing against? Sagan doesn't have a train.
Yeah.
I think was Quebecer there with NTT was there with. No, they weren't there with Nizzolo.
Chimolai had no helpers at all, or was it this year? That was this year.
Quickstep had a climbing team. Maybe I'm misremembering, but there wasn't a train. He was competing against Consoni and Viviani, in terms of positioning. So when it comes down to more sprint competition here against De Koning with a full train for Jakobsen and Alpecin for Jasper Philipsen, they were there as well, I believe. Oh no, they were at the Vuelta. They just didn't look as good. So maybe it's train, maybe it's Demar. I'm not sure, but yeah, definitely a season to forget for, I think, Demar and FDJ and the Vuelta to forget. Why do you think, where's Godu, Benji? Where's David Godu?
Not in the Vuelta, it seems. But he won the Tour de France, so I think that's partially the reason that he's not going to the Vuelta just after it. But then again, someone like him could do 2 Grand Tours these days. What is his plan for the coming part of the season? Focusing on Lombardia, most likely, it seems. So perhaps those are his goals, and he didn't want to throw away the chance at Lombardia with the Vuelta, but I don't know.
He would have beaten Stora on Balcon d'Alicante, I reckon. That's my view. There's some stages that for David Godu at the Vuelta, he won 2 last year that really, really suit him. So when riders win Grand Tour stages at a race, maybe it means they're pretty good at that race, or maybe it's random. But anyway, what's the any defining things that you'll remember from this Vuelta España, Benji, or things that you think will have a big influence next year? My big influence for next year is, I think, this now. Just Jack Hay getting on the podium instead of coming fourth, just that change in place means that he will almost certainly be given probably Tour de France leadership, but one would hope next year for Bahrain Victorious, parkour dependent.
That's an understandable take based on the stuff we've seen here.
But if fourth, maybe not.
Yeah.
Fourth, maybe they're like, fourth, not so good.
Yeah, true. Would they dare to have Caruso as leadership at the Tour de France? He's going to go to the Giro. It's Caruso.
Yeah.
But I've got a similar note, but on a different rider. I think that this confirms that Jakobsen is a sprinter for the Koenig next season at the Tour de France if we don't have crashes, because I do not see Cavendish being worth more in that race than Jakobsen, considering Jakobsen is much younger, is potentially the future of the team when it comes to sprinting, despite sprinters on the Koenig not going much longer than 2-3 years usually at their peak. And I don't know, would they re-sign Cavendish? Does this influence that?
Both Cavendish and Lefebvre are saying, it is not up to me. So I don't know who it's up to. Am I in charge of re-signing him? Maybe it's in there, but it's not up to me. It's like, well, one of you, it is, because Cavendish, you're asking for this much, and Lefebvre is asking for a packet of peanuts. So it's up to both of you to meet somewhere in the middle. Jakobsen's better, straight up. Jakobsen's better. If you give him, we saw him, by the way, they are determined, Benji, to make Bert van Leeuwenhoek and Morkov 2.0. Maybe it'll happen, but Jakobsen was winning in spite of his train this Vuelta. Give him the full train. There'll be more sound effects next year, I'm sure, when he wins. But that was our Vuelta España full recap. We enjoyed watching it, particularly the third week. As always, thanks to Le Col for the support during the Vuelta España and throughout the year. If you want to use our discount code, the last couple of days it's active for the Vuelta España. LR Vuelta 20 for 20% off all items at Le Col. We're changing seasons into autumn now, allegedly, in Europe, and going into summer in Australia. So make sure you can check out some Le Col kit at the link below, www.lecol.cc, for performance cycling apparel. Until the European Championships recap tomorrow, we'll see you then. Ciao.